Hi, this is Mrs. Hensel and it's week 4 and we're making pastry in honour of VE Day. So we're doing an afternoon tea, and pastry products can be used for a variety of items. So for example, we could use quiche Lorraine, we could use custard tarts, jam tarts, baked roll tarts. So I'm about to take you through, first of all, short crust pastry. The equipment you will need is a quiche tin, depending on how much flour you are using. I'm using 400 grams of flour today, and I'm hoping that will be sufficient to cover my pastry, to cover this size of area. The next thing you'll need is you'll need a fork, a tablespoon, a teaspoon, a pair of scissors, a knife. You'll notice I've got some baking beans, however you could use rice. This is used for holding down and for absorbing any moisture in the pastry when we first cook our pastry base to dry it out. The second thing you will need is you will need some grease-proof paper and some cling film, and also, if you've got one, a flour dredger, as well as a mixing bowl and a sieve. It's also quite a good idea to have a measuring jug full of cold water. For short crust pastry, you will need 100 grams of plain flour, 25 grams of lard or Trex, 2 tablespoons of cold water and 25 grams of hard margarine. Remember, the ratio of making short crust pastry is your fat is 2 to 1. So whatever you use for your flour, plain flour, you always halve the amount of fat. So for example, if I'm using 400 grams of plain flour, then I will need 200 grams of fat, which will be a 100 gram split between 100 grams of Trex and 100 grams of margarine. You'll also need a pinch of salt just for flavouring. So to start off with, we're going to use our 400 grams of flour. I'm going to place that into the sieve. The reason we are using the sieve is to first of all get air into the mixture, and also to check if we've got any lumps, and second, to make sure there's nothing that's been growing in there, such as weevils, which are little insects that lay their eggs onto the wheat that hatch out sometimes in the bag of flour. So hopefully that won't happen today. Okay, so you can either tap it like so to get air into the flour, or you can use a teaspoon, a tablespoon, just to stir it around to get the flour through. It's entirely up to you how you do it. Okay, I'm going to put the remainder of the flour into the sieve. I'm going to sieve through all of the flour. If there are any lumps, you can just push them through with the back of the tablespoon. Okay, so the next stage, what we're going to do is we're going to need a pinch of salt. Don't do this over the bowl, just in case your lid pops. And 1 pinch is classed as just between your thumb and your index finger. Now mine was 1 pinch for 100 grams, so I'm going to give it an extra pinch. Okay, so the next stage, just going to get rid of this salt. Okay, so the next stage, I'm going to add in my margarine. So this is 100 grams of margarine and 100 grams of Trex. I'm using this because my daughter is vegan, or if you had a vegetarian in your household, this is also quite friendly, so that they can also eat the pastry, and it turns out absolutely beautiful, I have to say. I've done it many times. Okay, so top tip, you're going to cover your fat, which is your margarine and your Trex, over with your flour. This will stop your mixture from getting sticky before you start. You could do this in a food processor if you wanted to, but I feel it's preferable doing it with your hands. So it's basically using the rubbing in method, which is just your fingertips, which are the cooler part of your hands. If your hands are really hot, you can always run them under a cold tap first before you start and then dry them off. Okay, so we're going to be doing the rubbing in method, which is basically going money, 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 money. Okay, so once it looks like breadcrumbs, what we're going to be doing is adding your tablespoons of water. Now, if you remember, it was 2 tablespoons for 100 grams, so therefore it should be about 8 tablespoons in total. And instead of using a spoon to stir, I'm going to use my knife to actually gather it. You could use a palette knife if you wanted to, which is the flat bladed knife. I'm just using a normal butter knife. So I'm going to add 2 at a time, and then I'm going to give it a stir. Now, if you remember short crust pastry, the reason that it is called short crust is the margarine is actually acting as a waterproof layer to the flour granules, so that the water is struggling to penetrate the flour granules. Okay, so I'm going to add another 1, 2. Now remember, if it suddenly starts going to a dough and you're thinking, do you know what, I don't need to add the other tablespoons of water, then stop. Don't persist, because all you'll end up with is a soggy dough. Okay, it's just starting to come together with my knife, and I've only added 4 tablespoons of. I have a feel of that. It feels quite wet, to be fair. I'm going to bring it all together with my hand into a dough ball. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow it to have a relaxing time in the fridge, which will relax the gluten and give me time to prepare my filling. Okay, you don't need to turn the oven on at this stage. You don't want your kitchen getting warm. Okay, so that's going into either a carrier bag or a piece of cling film or a bowl with a lid, something to protect it whilst it's in the fridge, and it's going to have its relaxation time. Got my pastry in my cling film, and now I'm going to put it into the fridge. Okay, so the tip was we've placed a piece of cling film underneath, piece of cling film over the top. We've not floured it because we don't want to alter the ratio, and we're going to gently roll on top of the dough. This will enable us to be able to pick it up, like I was struggling before, but it should be able to pick it up. See the lovely marble effect going through the pastry. Make sure this cling film is nice and straight and smooth. So it needs to be big enough again to do the whole of the bottom of the quiche tin and the sides. Okay, so a neat trick when you're trying to work out how much liquid you need is to pour in approximately what you think this dish will contain. So you only want to fill up to about half full, and that will give you a good indicator of how much you will need. So I've got 400 ml in here, and that fills up quite nicely, because what you've got to take into account is that not only because of the eggs it's going to rise, but also it's going to be the same quantity. So you want the same quantity in eggs, and then you're going to be topping up with cream. So I'm just going to drain my flan dish, dry it, and then I'm going to grease it. So I've greased my dish, and now I'm going to make sure that I've got enough pastry to not only go around the bottom of the quiche dish, but also the sides. Okay, so it looks like I have, and if you remember earlier I showed you that neat little trick where I put my cling film, my pastry dough, and then put my line of cling film over the top, and I rolled out so that I don't add any extra flour to it, because that will alter your wet to dry. Okay, so I'm going to remove the top layer of the cling film, like so, and I should now be able to pick that up quite nicely without it cracking too much. Okay, so you see. Okay, I've rescued many classroom disasters from whatever it cracking and so forth. It does say if your pastry is too dry, you can always knit it back together with a little bit of fat, kneading it in. Okay, so I'm going to use my rolling pin just to pick it up so that it's got kind of stability. Okay, so I should be able to pick it up quite nicely now. I'm going to put my bowl in place, holding my rolling pin, just going over the top there, just unfolding it with my cling film. Don't take the cling film off yet, that's still there for helping. Okay, so lift up your sides, drape them in, and use the back of your finger just to support the weight whilst you are helping it into the dish. So once you've gone all the way around, helping it in, that is the point when you can take your cling film off. Okay, so it looks like it's in my dish. I'm going to remove the cling film carefully. Okay, and then you need to go round with a knife, just round the edge. Always go with the outside edge when cutting, just because otherwise what might happen is it will shrink back into the oven, and you want your sides to be big enough to be able to support your quiche mixture. So I'm just going round with my sharp knife, just giving a bit of a cleaner edge. Going away from you, just to stop any accidents happening. Now if you do get any gaps, okay, this can be remedied with a bit of your rolled out pastry. So use a bit of your rolled out pastry with your neat edge, and you can use a bit of water there just to press it together to hold it. Okay, and then you can cut it again, and who would know. Okay, so The next stage, what we're going to do is you're going to prick out the base to stop any air pockets rising in your dough. Do not go all the way through your quiche dish, because otherwise your liquid will seep through onto the bottom of the surface, and as Mary Berry said, we don't want a soggy bottom. Okay, so just around the edge like so. Okay, to blind bake, you will have pricked out your base, you'll cut your edges, okay, making them big enough so when they shrink back it doesn't make them too low. You're going to place your greaseproof paper over the top, which it must cover all parts of the pastry, but you don't want it touching any elements of the oven. And then you're going to use your baking beans just over the top. Here's a ceramic baking bean. Just to hold down your paper, and that's going to be popped in the oven. This is called blind baking. It's going to be popped in the oven for 15 minutes. Don't forget to use your oven gloves. So the amount of eggs will depend on how big your flan dish is and what you've done. So I'm going to be using 6 eggs. I'm going to be using 100 grams of cheese, and I'm going to be topping up my cream to approximately, I'm on 300 at the moment, I'm going to be topping it up to another 100 mils on top. So first of all, I'm going to whisk up my 6 eggs. I'm going to add my 100 mils of cream, just finishing one off before I start the next one. You could use single cream if you wanted to make it more healthier, or laid back cream, which is what I'm using. So I'm using the only double light 50% less fat. So that's made it up to 400. Okay, so I've whisked up my 6 eggs. I've added my cream until it gets to 400. And then I'm seasoning it with salt and pepper. With a stir. And then you want to weigh out 100 grams of grated cheese. Now I'm going to be using a mature cheddar, so that's a lot stronger in flavour. Okay, so ready to add the filling now. So I would suggest you add your 100 grams of cheese first of all into the base, distribute it nicely. Then put in your ham, spread it out. I've done 2 slices. So, then you're going to pour in your egg mixture, which is your egg with your cream. Okay, so as I said before, it's going to come to about halfway up on the pastry. If you want to sprinkle it with herbs, you could. If you wanted to add some cherry tomatoes, cut them in half, put them on top. You could, if you've got a young child that, for example, you wanted mushrooms and tomatoes and they didn't, what you could do is put them on at the end so that you can see which half it's actually going to be on. Okay, so as I said before, if you wanted to add some chopped tomato, or you could add some sweet pepper like I've done here, this would enable you to see which side was which flavoured. Okay, so that's ready to go in the oven now. It will take about approximately 30 minutes. The way you would tell whether it's done is it will be golden, it will be risen because coagulation will have taken place, and also I was going to say that you need to be careful when doing this, but you're going to use oven gloves when taking out. If you give it a little bit of a shake, if you can see that it's just a wobble and not whatever, and it looks set rather than liquid, then you would also know that it's done. Okay, so once your quiche is out of the oven, I did talk about doing a wobble test. So use your gloves and just shake it. Obviously, whatever the pastry should have come away from the sides of the dish, which shows that it's cooked. But also, when you do the wobble test, there's no liquid within the actual dish. Okay, don't worry about too much about it.